Ah, that's some good Zola. We'll have a simultaneous sip in a moment when all hands are on deck. Come on in, come on in. I know it's the weekend, but it's time for Coffee with Scott Adams, featuring no coffee whatsoever today. We're on to the Zola. Did I forget to put in a topic today? I think I did. So, I've got a few topics. My favorite topic of the day is apparently, I saw a tweet where some students in Florida have on message boards, I don't know which message boards they're talking about, are talking about on April 20th that they would all walk out of school and they wouldn't come back until gun violence had been solved. Is that the best idea you've ever heard in your life? So the students are planning to have a walkout that's coincidentally on 4/20, the International Marijuana Smoking Day. But no, it's not about the marijuana smoking. They're totally protesting gun violence. And they're not coming back until something happens to solve all that gun violence. Now, I just tweeted that whatever student came up with this idea first of let's all have a walkout on 4/20 because of gun violence, that student is almost certainly on the National Honor Roll. Pretty sure. At the very least, it's a master persuader rising. 4/20 is Columbine. Well, that's perfect. The beauty of it is if they can actually make it look like it's a principled walkout, there's not much anybody's going to say. No, it's a total coincidence that it's the National Marijuana Day and people take that day off of school anyway, claiming they're sick. Why don't we make it a national demonstration? All right. Now, the other thing that is amusing the heck out of me is that the deep state and all of its minions, they all get the memo at the same time. If anything good happens for the president, they all get the same memo, spin it this way. And it looks like the way that the deep state and its minions, meaning the media, have decided to go after Trump after the 13 Russian indictments. This is Chris Cillizza, who is, I would put him in my top 3 least credible people on the planet, at least on the anti-Trump side. I'm sure there's some not credible people on the other side as well. But on the anti-Trump side, the 3 least credible people would be Clapper, Brennan, and Chris Cillizza, who writes for CNN. And here's his headline, or his title for his piece today on CNN Politics page, is Robert Mueller just made it impossible for Trump to call the special counsel probe a, quote, total hoax. So Brennan said the same thing, which is Trump's claim that the Russia investigation is a total hoax is falling apart. And you're seeing a number of other people who are going to say the same thing. Now, the clever thing about this is that when President Trump said it was a total hoax, clearly and unambiguously, what he meant was the part about saying that he was colluding with Russia. It's been, I don't know how many months, everybody has agreed that Russia's troll farm was trolling. Nobody disagreed with that. The president didn't disagree with that. He knew that was true. He just said the hoax part, the quote, total hoax, was that he was involved in collusion. And the brazenness with which the deep state minions are presenting this as if it's bad for the president, when I'm pretty sure with what we know so far, you can't say anything about what hasn't happened yet, but what's happened so far is unambiguously positive for the president. Now, the president, of course, is doing his own persuasion weasel approach by saying that the indictment of the 13 Russians, in conjunction with, I guess, Rosenstein or Stein, I never know which way to say it, who said that the FBI is not alleging collusion, and they're not alleging that there were any witting being the key word here, witting American accomplices that were colluding. Now, President Trump has cleverly and smartly framed that as saying that they found no collusion. Now, of course, that's not what is happening. What they're saying is these specific indictments do not allege anything about collusion. They don't allege it happened. They don't allege it didn't happen. It's just not in this indictment. But the way it was worded, and also the timing of it, because it's been so long and we haven't heard anything that would demonstrate, there's any real collusion. The president has taken the opportunity to say, well, there it is. There you have it, no collusion. Now, that's not what happened, but you would not expect him to spin it any other way. Why doesn't he simply say it is the president's job to collude with other countries? Well, that would be too cute, I think. So the other thing that I think is interesting is I think we now have a way to figure out who the deep state is. Now, not all of them, but I would propose, and I can't prove this, of course, so this is just for fun, but I would propose that anyone who starts using the attack that says that the president's claim of a hoax has now been debunked, my assumption is, this is just speculation, but it's informed speculation, that it's not a coincidence that so many people take the same line of attack that is so ridiculous. Now, if people took the same line of attack and it was obvious and smart and it all made sense, you'd say, well, those are people just being smart and making sense. But because the claim is so unambiguously false, saying that his hoax claim has been debunked when in fact he was talking about collusion and nobody's talked about collusion. His hoax claim is a lot closer to being confirmed, but not confirmed, than it is to being debunked. So when you see people taking this fairly ridiculous but effective persuasion strategy, in other words, claiming that the president was wrong, even though there's no evidence of that based on the current news, it's probably not a coincidence that they're all getting the same message, the same memo, and they're attacking in the same way. Very much like when people use the word dark all of a sudden during the campaign. Now, there's somebody here who keeps saying, I'll need Dale to help me out here. Are you claiming that the anti-Trumpers, like Chris Cillizza and John Brennan, are you claiming that their persuasion is unethical? Oh, so now suddenly there's such a thing as unethical persuasion. Suddenly you care about ethics. You care about persuasion ethics. Suddenly. Well, Dale, let me explain this to you. If you're using persuasion, even with a little fact-checking that doesn't quite work, even with a little hyperbole, and your clear intention is to make America great again, and you have a year of successfully doing exactly that, you might say that persuasion even though it does not pass the fact-checking, Dale, is probably a good thing. Now compare that, Dale, to what? What are we comparing that to? Shut up, Dale. We're comparing that to, let's say, the deep state, who's using persuasion dishonestly to take down a legally elected sitting president. So, Dale, you realize you're comparing the ethics of making America great again for all people and then watching it happen versus the ethics of trying to overthrow the government of the United States, which has legally elected a president who is performing well. Did those things look the same to you, Dale, ethically speaking? There's lying. There's lying in both cases. That's like Hitler. Shut up, Dale. Stop saying Hitler. 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 Shut up, Dale. All right. Dale doesn't like to compare. Yeah, so the other thing funny is that so CNN and some of the anti-Trumpers are trying to spin this as one of Trump's worst weeks. And the reasoning for that would be in part the Rob Porter story. Oh, does anybody remember Rob Porter? You remember there was a story about this guy, Rob Porter? I can't remember how long ago that was. It feels like, I don't know, was that 2 or 3 years ago? That was a story about this Rob Porter guy. Can't even remember it. It seems so long ago. I just remember somebody did something bad and the Trump administration fired him. That's sort of all I remember. But this week, what we have is these terrible, terrible stories about the president. So I could see why CNN would say it's a bad time. I mean, look at all the bad things that happened to the president. The stock market recovered from its brief correction. Nobody likes that. They fired somebody who needed to be fired. Should have done it faster. Nobody likes that. There was a story that the president was married to a supermodel while he was having sex with an ex-Playmate of the Year. Nobody wants to hear that. You know, if you ever wanted to hate the president, well, there's a good reason. And then, of course, there's the story that the hoax has been debunked, the Russia hoax. In reality, here's what happened. You've already forgotten Rob Porter. You may have just seen an article that was in National Review, I think, by Richard David Hanson. I hope I have his name right. A conservative Stanford professor, writer, and he said what I've been saying for a while, which is that the North Korea situation is a situation in which time is on our side. Oh, Victor David Hanson. Okay, thank you. And Victor David Hanson is saying a lot what I've said, which is our war against the North Korean economy is succeeding while our own economy is doing great. So our economy is going up, their economy is going down. We are at war, and we're winning. We're winning it pretty hard. That's what he said, and I agree. Now, so you got that going well. You've got the president accused of colluding with Russia. At the same time, there's a story that our forces killed a bunch of Russians in Syria and apparently didn't give a shit. So that doesn't quite make sense with the whole colluding with Russia story. And then you have the assistant AG coming out and saying that we are not claiming there's collusion and we're not alleging there was any witting collusion with the Russian trolls. Now that's not saying that the Trump administration did nothing wrong, but it sure sounds like it. You know, the public is going to hear that and say, well, that sounds like we just wasted a year looking for nothing. All right, but now that we're toward the latter part of my, anyway, let me summarize that point. The president has had, this week is one of the president's best weeks ever. It really is. But you could certainly spin it if you're on the other side. It's like, it's his worst week ever, things are going bad. There was a personnel change, which won't have much to do with anything. Kelly's still there. It looks like he might hold on, because I don't see things getting worse for Kelly, but I see the news already being ancient history. So it looks like he might be able to hold on, but I guess it depends on finding out who do what when. So here's the most interesting thing about the Russia troll farm and the claim that there were, quote, unwitting connections with them, meaning that the Russians were posing as not Russians and did have contact with not only maybe campaign people, but regular Americans. So here's the question I asked to you. What are the odds that I had unwitting contact with Russian operatives? What do you think? What are the odds that I personally had unwitting contact with Russian operatives on Twitter, let's say, posing as, just regular citizens? Yeah, well, let me give you the answer to that. The answer is 100%. Now, if you ask me which one of the people that I've interacted with on Twitter are the Russians, I would say, I don't know. I have no idea. But if you ask me, did I know during the election that a large number of my Twitter followers who were magnifying my message, did I know that they were not real people? Yes, I did. I totally knew it. Not only did I know it, but I knew at least one person who was behind it. Not a Russian, just somebody who was pro-Trump. And I asked for confirmation. And I said, now that the election's over, can you tell me how many of the people I interacted with were actually the trolls, the fake people that you had sent to magnify my message? And his answer was, not zero. So I don't have a confession, but let's just say that I have confirmation that some of the people who were magnifying my message were not real people. Now, it's also true that a tremendous number of people who were my critics during the campaign were clearly, an organized troll group that I assume were David Brock's group, the $1 million he paid for trolls to come after Trump supporters, because they all had the same message. They would all come in and they'd say exactly the same three things about me that didn't even make much sense. So that the similarity of the messages that would all come in at once, and then there would be like, dozens of people would say exactly the same thing, and then on one day, just nobody would say that again. So it was like a wave of bots came in and did what they were trained to do and then left. So yes, I was quite aware that during the election there were bots on both sides who were some were pumping me up and some were tearing me down, but I certainly knew they weren't real. Now, I couldn't identify every one as being real or not. Like if you gave me a test and said, all right, here are a bunch of the characters that you were dealing with on a regular basis during the election, how many of those are not real people? I think I could get 75%. I think I could get 75%, just based on the way they interacted with me. But let me say here, in case the FBI is listening, and I'm sure the FBI is listening, because they listen to everything apparently, or the NSA does. I don't have any memory of being aware or even suspicious that the bots were Russian. Now, in retrospect, I would say the odds of at least some of those bots being Russian, probably 100%. All right, I would be literally amazed if I wasn't on their list. Now, my thinking here is that if you're Russian bots and you're trying to influence the influencers, and they should, right? That they should have been trying to influence the influencers. So if they were trying to boost my messaging, they should have been there, and they should have been they should have been doing that. And if they weren't, I don't know why they weren't. But I wouldn't be able to know which ones were them and which ones were just Americans who were boosting my message. Somebody says he's here to call out my lies. Calling out my lies. Yeah, one of the most interesting things about being me, and I can't tell how much of this is just me. You know how sometimes you think you're the only one in the world who's having some experience, and then you find out, oh, everybody's having the same experience. So it might be one of those cases. But I will tell you that if you look at the history of my online interactions with people who were my critics, I would say that my best estimate is that 80% of all the criticisms I've ever had about my opinion were not my opinion. In other words, people were imagining an opinion and then criticizing it. But it's very rare. If you follow my Twitter feed at all, it's very rare for someone to criticize my actual opinion. You know, you only see people saying stuff like, "You're wrong," or they'll send me a link to something that's, irrelevant. But typically, when they say, "You're saying X and that's so wrong," it's just a straw man that they've created, or they've hallucinated it, or they've got cognitive dissonance. It's very rare for someone to disagree with my actual opinion. And I don't know if that's just something about me, or if that's just, universal in exactly the same way for everybody. I just don't know. What if the bots are learning your techniques? Well, they are. So here's the other thing. So people are also saying that Trump is having a bad week for lots of different reasons. But one of the other things that works in his favor, in the worst possible way. So let me take my attitude down here a little bit, because there's some things you shouldn't joke about, and this is certainly one of them. So jokes aside, the shooting in Florida was terrible, and it's bad for the NRA, it's bad for pro-gun people, so that's bad for the president, bad for Republicans, because that gives them yet another black eye. But in this particular case, because the FBI not only failed, but seriously failed to the tune of lots of people getting killed and injured, and admitted it. And by the way, I can't say this enough. The way the FBI took responsibility for that failure, if you saw the initial statement on it, there was some FBI agent who read the statement. The way they took responsibility for that quickly and unambiguously, and then said, we're going to try to fix it, that's as good as it can be. So if the FBI was trying to regain some credibility that was losing recently, they certainly lost it by dropping the ball on this Florida shooter. But the way they handled the accepting of responsibility was actually pretty good. I have to say, you can't take that away from them. They handled that just right. You don't see that often. It won't bring the dead kids back. That is true. So, who would be surprised if President Trump backed some form of limited gun control? Who would be surprised to see President Trump move to the middle on gun control? I would not be surprised. I'm not predicting it, but I wouldn't be surprised. Now, he can't go all the way. He's not going to go, full whatever. But I'm not well informed on the whole gun control situation. So there are lots of, details about proposals for controlling things, and I don't know the ins and the outs. But it does seem to me that if somebody who has a history of, mental illness or a history of, police interactions, that the gun seller should have access to that information, and there should be some restrictions about whether or not they can get one. For example, if you have someone who has been the subject of, let's say, I'll just randomly say, more than 3 police calls to their house for potential, violence-related situations, even if they didn't get arrested, maybe that's good reason not to let them have a gun, right? So that's probably the bad example, but it seems to me that there should be enough of a track record that the gun seller can see it. Let me give you another example. Let's say you had a law that says a gun seller needs to. Let me change directions here. I'm going to propose something just way out. So this will be my way out proposal. So the country has tons of old people and people who can't leave the house or in wheelchairs or whatever else. So you have tons of people who have time on their hands and would probably like to help. Maybe they'd like a job too. Incoming call knocked me off there. Imagine, if you will, an organization of what I'll call watchers. So these are just citizens who have agreed to watch other citizens, but not watch them directly, rather watch their social media feeds. So, for example, when this Florida shooter started posting, let's say the very first time he posted a gun, wouldn't it be good if all your social media sites had a button where you could report that person to the watchers? So you're not reporting them to the police because it's not illegal to show a picture of a person with a gun. But you're reporting it to watchers. And then the watchers collect your other social media into one feed. And whenever you've got a post, the watchers collectively just are watching. And if the watchers see that your social media has gone to the point of being problematic, then the watchers, maybe with more than one of them agreeing or something, 3 out of 5 or something, then they submit it to law enforcement for evaluation. Because there's no way that law enforcement is going to be watching social media all the time. That's sort of not their job. But you could very easily get either volunteer or low-paid people working at home, who just put in whatever hours that they're available. So you could build an app where all of the social media companies have one button. Let's say that's a law. Let's say the law. All right, how about this? How about the law is that if somebody on social media is questionable, that every social media entity has to have a report button, but it doesn't report it to law enforcement. It doesn't do that. It reports it to watchers who look at all their social media interactions that are public and just watch. Now that might require that if somebody has let's say a private Instagram page, that the watchers can actually see past the privacy. So it might require that the watchers can see social media pages that are private as long as they've been reported. Right? But the watchers would be sworn to secrecy, and they don't really care about these citizens anyway. They're just strangers. So the only things they'd report are problematic stuff. This is too Orwellian. You know what I say about analogies. Right? Let me put this in a different frame. Humans are tribal creatures, meaning that we evolved to be in tribal situations. That's our most basic social organizing structure. But modern society has destroyed that and turned us into little family units that are disconnected from the rest of the world except in specific ways. The idea of having senior citizens as watchers is essentially trying to get back to a tribal situation where anybody who is in a tribe would have lots of people watching them. So it's the watching that keeps you under control. It's the fact that there are eyes on you, and the eyes on you are well-meaning eyes. Right? It would be a big problem if government law enforcement was watching you all the time. Like, that would be creepy and bad. But to have a tribal, the seniors of your tribe keeping an eye out for what's happening in the tribe and simply reporting it if and only if there's something that looks like it's dangerous, that feels like a move in the right direction, not the wrong direction. To me, it does. Somebody says, no thank you. Well, keep in mind that I'm talking about social media in which lots of people are looking at it anyway. I'm just talking about making it easy to identify trouble. That's it. Can you scale up a tribe to the whole country? Well, it's a virtual tribe. You're wrong, Scott. Old people would not understand the memes. Yeah, that's why it should be a combination of old people and maybe younger people who just need a job at home or even are just volunteering. You would need the watchers to be not simply old people. So as somebody said, you need enough young people in that mix that they can surface something that an older person just wouldn't have even noticed. It could be a word, something like that. Police would not be able to cope with the data. Right, that's why you don't want the police to be doing the watching all the time. You want them only to receive the most dangerous looking leads. How do you keep politics out? Well, crime is crime. Crime is not political. Cruz was noticed without the watchers. He was, but here's the problem. The citizens contacted the police or this FBI and then they dropped the ball. Now, it may be that we'll be able to fix that. But if the watchers had a more official role, you would expect that their input would be high on the list of things the police would pay attention to. It would quickly be labeled as racist. That and everything else in the world. What's to keep the watchers from false reporting? So what you'd want to do is have the watchers have multiple watchers who don't know each other, and that's key, right? So that the watchers don't know who the other watchers are unless they know one personally. And in order for something to be reported to police, let's say one watcher says, this is it, I'm going to report this to the police. Instead of sending it to the police, they send it to another group of watchers who are the control of the watchers. In other words, even the watchers have watchers within the watchers. It's like second, third, fourth, fifth opinion. So if one watcher says, hey, I think this should be reported, it doesn't get reported until strangers they don't even know have looked at the same stuff, and enough of the strangers have agreed by, let's say 3 out of 4 people or whatever it is. So you could make sure that people don't get away with being too biased, because there'd be strangers of different political standing who would have to check their work before anything got submitted. Who watches the watchers? It's called a moderator. It could be. Yes, so remember I told you that the Democratic memo, if the Democratic memo had anything, that we would have already heard it by now. Certainly they would have already edited their memo and taken out the secret stuff, which Schiff has now apparently admitted there is in the memo. But I think I'm going to have to claim success in predicting that the Democratic memo has nothing, or else we would have already heard it. Stanford prisoner experiment. Now, I think the only way the watchers work is if you have lots of watchers who don't know each other, checking each other's work all the time. And then I think you're in good shape. Alcohol kills more people than gun violence. Where is the outrage? Oh, you want to hear something interesting about alcohol? There is a scientist who has already created alcohol that makes you feel good without a lot of the health problems. So, and this synthetic alcohol that gives you kind of an alcohol buzz also has a plateau built into it. So it's a designer alcohol that's not alcohol, it's some kind of synthetic that makes you feel, according to the scientist, he said it makes you feel like you've had up to 2 glasses of wine. But here's the cool part. You could drink this synthetic alcohol all day long, and the most buzzed you can get is about 2 glasses of wine, which for most people would not result in them becoming violent. Even if they drove, which they shouldn't, the odds of them having an accident, I hate to say it's okay to drive with a little bit of alcohol, so let me be clear, it's not okay to drive with a little bit of alcohol in you. But if we're being, cold and calculated, the person with 5 hard drinks in them is going to be more dangerous than the person who has 2 glasses of wine in them. So there might be something really big coming in the world of alcohol that will make the deaths from alcohol go whoop. And that could be a big deal for healthcare. What happens when they get liver cancer? So apparently the synthetic alcohol does not have a bad effect on your organs. So that's one of its main reasons for being. Yeah. How would you prevent the watchers from being infiltrated by political activists? Why would you care? It doesn't matter who's looking. If somebody says, I have a gun and I plan to do something bad, does anybody care what political party that person belongs to? I don't think. I don't think anybody would care what political party that Cruz kid belonged to. Do you think there's anybody who would not have reported that kid? Because they're like, hey, he looks like he's on our team. Let him do this atrocity because he looks like he's one of ours. I don't think so. Somebody just said here, you look like a homosexual. Like, Are you from the past? It's always hard to tell on here who's joking and who isn't. But of all the comments that you would like spend your time writing down, like somebody got on this Periscope and said, I need to tell this guy he looks like a homosexual. Now let me quickly add to that statement. What the hell is wrong with looking like a homosexual? I've never heard that's even a bad thing. Is it? Did that become a bad thing? Is there a reason that half of the movie stars and celebrities, you find out later are gay, and they're incredibly good looking? You can say what you will about gay people, but unattractive is not really one of the things you'd say about them. That's not even unattractive. Isn't even on the. It's not even on the stereotype list, is it? It's sort of the opposite. Somebody said, "Did something big happen yet?" Remember, I said it was too quiet and something big was going to happen, and the very next day, I think it was the next day, was the Florida school shooting. Something big happened. Now, obviously, that wasn't exactly what I had in mind. I was thinking more that there was some political thing happening, although you could argue that's a political thing as well. When is fusion energy coming? Probably 5 years, according to the smartest person I know in that field. Will Trump enforce sanctions on Russia? Here's the trouble with us evaluating whether the president has or has not done enough with sanctions with Russia. Because it seems to me that there are the sanctions we hear about, and then there's the stuff we're doing under the hood. So if we are to believe, and it seems reasonable to believe to me, that both Russia and the United States have this ongoing, perpetual, cyber, psychological, psyops, battle that's just all the time. When you say to me, is the president going to impose sanctions? I'm not sure what that means, because we're kind of actively sanctioning each other all the time. And I'm not sure that the stuff we hear about, like, we'll put a tariff on you, or we won't let this bank do business or something, I'm not even sure that stuff is the part that matters. It could be that the stuff we don't hear about is all the important stuff, the stuff that really messes with them. Oh, by the way, I'm seeing now, let me do another fact check with you. So, this is, again, the sort of thing I only say toward the end of a Periscope when the people who don't care enough have already signed out. But do you remember me saying that this Christopher Steele guy, we should at least be having a conversation about executing him? Because he's a foreign national, a spy, literally a spy, but the fact that he's retired, doesn't mean much to me at all. Because if we sent our CIA over to mess with another country, and we just said, hey, Bob, you're going to go over and you're going to mess with China's elections, well, not China, but you're going to mess with some other country's elections, but we'll just say you're retired. Let's just call you retired. And that way, if they catch you, you'll say, CIA? Who's CIA? I used to be, but now I'm retired. I'm retired. I'm cool. I'm retired. Right? I don't think that retired means anything if you've literally been a career spook, right? If you're a career intelligence person, it's not my fault because I'm retired I'm sorry. That's the only job where that just doesn't work. All right. You can't be retired CIA and say, yeah, I did mess with your country, but I was retired. I was retired. Anyway, so my question to you, which I've taken too long to get to, is I'm now seeing some articles in the mostly conservative press, I think only conservative press, in which people are asking, why is Steele not being indicted? Because he's a foreign national who did not fill out the paperwork to, be messing with our elections. I guess if you fill out the paperwork, you're okay. And if we're indicting these Russians for being foreigners who interfered with our election, what's wrong with Christopher Steele? He's a foreigner, literally was a spy, retired, who was messing with our elections. But here's the other part. Not only did he mess with our elections, but he lied to the FBI. All right? Now, if he had just been working with the FBI, let's say let's say he had just given some information to the FBI. Let's say he was a walk-in and he said, hey, look, I was doing a project for the Democrats. They're paying me, but I found some stuff that you guys need to know about. Suppose the only thing he had done is present his information to the FBI. Then I would say, okay, even though you didn't fill out the paperwork, this is a gray area. I wouldn't necessarily want to prosecute someone who had helped our FBI if the information was accurate. But the information was not so accurate, at least not all of it. And then he lied to the FBI and released this stuff to the media. He met with the media to try to get them to print it. I guess Yahoo did and others didn't. So let me put this together. Foreign national, involved with our election, trying to influence it, and then lied to the FBI about this topic. That's pretty close to execution level. I'm no lawyer, but let me tell you, if a retired CIA agent went over and tried to interfere with another country's election and then lied to their intelligence agencies about it so that he could spill the beans to their press to therefore further change the result of the election while he's working with their intelligence agencies, I think he disappears. I think that guy gets executed. Make him ambassador to North Korea. All right, I think that's enough.